Welcome back. I haven't talked about wrestling on this channel in a while, so I'm just gonna give like an updated view, and I don't need a whiteboard for this. AEW Dynamite, I have not been able to get through an episode in a long time, and now when I'm watching some of the segments, because I do like to catch up on what's going on, some of the segments just aren't landing well either, and so some of the stuff I had been interested in, I'm losing interest in. Like I'd always, I like to keep up with the women's division to see if it gets itself straightened out. And it looked like it was starting to, and then it just devolves into whatever. And then with WWE, I can watch those shows. I can watch Raw. I can watch SmackDown. I enjoy NXT. NXT has got back to being, arguably, it has the best women's division out of any show. Arguably, it has some of the best storylines as well. And there's some goofy bits to it, sure, but I mean that's in most of wrestling. And so like the WWE right now has become the much better product. And what it is, and I was thinking about this yesterday. AEW's become a a B action movie, like where the action is good. So when the wrestlers are in the ring and the wrestling's going on, it's actually pretty good wrestling. I know that some people get tired of all the gymnastics being done in the ring and all the flips and everything else, and it can be a little bit much, but I think the biggest issue they have is not in the ring. Once that bell goes, it's pretty good until the end. Now, there are exceptions, but WWE has exceptions too. WWE has plenty of times where matches just fall flat. Certain wrestlers, if you watch Botchamania, you know there's certain WWE wrestlers who are frequently on Botchamania, but for the most part, they're still over. For the most part, when they botch a move, it doesn't destroy the match. It doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad match. And AEW, it's a similar tale. So the in-ring, I think, is very comparable between the two. But the storylines, the ability to really draw in an audience with the storyline, like, okay, you had the attack on Tony Khan that went nowhere. Then they attacked Kenny Omega, which to this point has gone nowhere. And I'm going to say this too. I've no doubt that Kenny Omega at some point comes back and looks for some measure of revenge. But since this whole power trip angle with the EVPs went nowhere, you might as well just bring Kenny Omega back and feud him with MJF. And MJF might be the one guy who I'm really interested to see what happens with in AEW, and it's kind of sad because there's a lot of good wrestlers there. I'm just not interested. I think that, and I talked about this before, and there's been plenty of talk about Edge getting hurt because he took a bump he shouldn't have, took a jump he shouldn't have as well. And without Edge and with some of the storylines and the ways they've gone, it just, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like anything matters. You've got Blackpool Combat Club rebranding themselves. I think the only thing that I'm going to be interested in is if Shane McMahon does join AEW, I'm interested to see how that might change the dynamic. Now, word on why the whole Tony Khan storyline went nowhere is, and again, this is just reports, that Tony didn't want it to appear that he wasn't booking the show. He didn't want to be in a position where other people were seen to be booking the show. He wanted to still be the guy. Now, if that's the case, that's a terrible idea. Even Vince, and Vince is at this point a villain. I don't think anybody would argue Vince McMahon at this point is not like a supervillain. But Vince was perfectly willing to be written off TV for extended periods of time. We knew he was still backstage. We knew he was still making decisions. I don't understand why a promoter in 2024 would think, well, the storyline can't be that these guys are making matches because then it doesn't look like I'm booking things. We understand that what we see on TV is not the same as what's going on backstage. At least it shouldn't be. There's some bad promos. There was a Chris Statlander promo she cut on Mercedes, and it was bad. It came off as like, I don't even want to say indie. I don't even want to say local. I don't want to insult local wrestlers. There's some guys who come to Abbotsford here from All Star Wrestling who are quite good at cutting promos. They cut very good promos. And remember, when you're going out to watch an indie show, you may not be familiar with the characters and the feuds. So they've got to get you invested during that couple of hours they have you there. They do a pretty good job of that. And I don't know that AEW does right now. And as soon as, Chris Statlander's talking about Mercedes, I was like, okay, so now I understand why she's had a manager and why her character initially didn't really speak. And and this is part of what frustrates me with AEW too. I can watch WWE and say, okay, Bailey. I'll take Bailey for an example. Bailey is a completely different character than she used to be, and I also feel like her moveset has changed over the years. She still does the Bailey to belly here and there. That's no longer really considered to be her finisher. And I think she's a better wrestler than she was, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And a lot of the women in that division, I feel like, have got better. A lot of the men have got better. Chad Gable is one of the best wrestlers in the world. And I'm perfectly fine with him losing a lot of his matches, because you do need to have somebody who's putting other people over. You need to have a certain amount of heat with that wrestler as well, so fans are excited when they see that guy take the pin. But when I'm watching AEW and I'm looking at some of these wrestlers, and I've been asking myself the question, are these better wrestlers than they were 5 years ago? Are they better with promos than they were 5 years ago? Are we seeing a better product from AEW right now than what we saw when they started out? Because when they started out and you'd see little issues, people would say, hey, they're a startup, they're just getting going, and they're already at least as good as WWE. So this is a good sign. This is fine. It's not a big deal that things aren't necessarily things aren't necessarily great in the ring, and some of the storylines. They'll figure it out. They'll get it together. Well, now it's been around 5 years. And it's to me personally, I find the product on TV now less watchable than it was 5 years ago. I am less invested in any of the characters, any of the feuds, and I'm not sure what the problem is. I do listen to the Jim Cornette broadcast, and they were comparing it to late WCW, so shortly before Vince McMahon bought it. Honestly, I can see it. Late WCW takes a lot of trashing from WWE programming because WWE won the war, and that's how it works. The victors get to write how the history books work with that kind of thing. But late WCW still had at least a segment every show, because I was watching Nitro towards the end. It was a fascinating car crash, but there were moments in any show where I went, you know what? That could be a good character. That could be a good story arc. There's something there. And I haven't been feeling that with AEW lately. In fact, there's wrestlers that I liked in WWE who I don't have any interest in watching now. The former Sasha Banks, I now look at her in AEW, and the question I ask myself is, okay, so on the microphone, she's not amazing. In the ring, I think Sasha, now Mercedes, takes more criticism than she should. I think she's a better wrestler than people give her credit for. I think she's just rubbed too many people the wrong way, is what it is. But it just feels like, as a character and as how she portrays herself, that she's taken a step back. But the other question I had in my mind was, did she take a step back, or was Bailey carrying her in WWE? Like when they were tag champs, it was mostly Bailey who was the one that was yelling. It was mostly Bailey who was the one that was getting all the heat and riling people up. And it was usually Bailey who in promos was really, driving the point home and getting you invested in their upcoming matches and feuds. So I'm left saying, so is Sasha Banks a female wrestler who was maybe overrated in WWE? Does her style of wrestling not work as well in AEW as it did? Maybe it worked better in Japan too. Like I'm just left searching. While over in WWE, you have the Judgment Day storyline, which is fascinating and has a million different angles going on at the same time. You have Bloodline 1.0 and 2.0, and the storylines surrounding that. You have the other angles within all of that, including, is Seth Rollins going to team with Roman? Will he turn against Roman? Is Sami going to turn heel at some point against the old bloodline to join the new bloodline? Which side is Paul Heyman going to be on when he comes back? How does CM Punk fit into this? There's a lot of different angles. There's a lot of different ways WWE can go with this, because when you watch Raw or SmackDown, it feels like one cohesive program. It feels like it's one cohesive program that's telling you a storyline as well as it can. It's not all perfect, it's not all great, but it's doing its best to tie last week into this week into next week. And AEW, and again, it's how I feel watching it. It feels like it's random. It feels like there's no connectivity between one angle and another. There's no, I don't know. There's no matches I look at in AEW and say, now if they put this match together, I have to see that. I don't feel that way anymore. And I did. I did 5 years ago. I did 4 years ago. It has gradually turned into, I don't feel like watching that. I'm not interested. So when you get into that territory, it's dangerous as a wrestling company, because now, and I don't think I'm the only one, the ratings are saying that people aren't as invested and they're not tuning in like they used to. So, and I know people always, oh, ratings don't mean much. Yes, but NXT has been drawing more viewers than AEW, and that's troubling because NXT is seen as developmental and AEW is supposed to be, that's the big show. And in the event that AEW is trying to shop around a second show, which would mean getting rid of, I guess, Collision goes, and I know Rampage is gone. The fact that AEW has got rid of Dark, and then they're going to get rid of Rampage, and it just feels like it's fly by the seat of your pants, throw everything at the wall, see what sticks, and shop around a new show when your current flagship show is in bad shape. I think before you can shop around a new show, you need to get your writing tightened up. You need to make sure that wrestlers are constantly, the ones that are young, they need to constantly be learning, and I don't feel like they necessarily do. And I've realized there's certain wrestlers that I look at and go, they could use some time in NXT. They could use some time in NXT, and they could use a little bit of work on some stuff. And the one that stands out to me is Anna Jay. Anna Jay's the one that I look at now and I go, I don't know that she's necessarily a lot better as a wrestler than she was 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know that her character is better. I think in some ways it's not. And I don't blame her. I look at it as a sign that this is a company who they don't book very well. Wrestlers don't seem to get trained up very well. And it's weird because we know there's good trainers, we know there's good facilities available. I'm not sure where it falls apart, but it feels like it rests on Tony Khan, who just keeps throwing money around. I'm just, throwing money at people. And I think that's the strategy that ultimately is going to fail. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is they have a good TV contract. They now have an extended TV contract and contract for various other media as well. But if the product on TV isn't good, if people are tuning out, which they are, and I understand too, the last time I talked about AEW, there were AEW fans that came in and, oh, you're just not watching right, or, oh, no, you're just wrong, you're just a WWE mark. When 5 years ago I would make videos about wrestling and talk about how much I was having a hard time watching WWE and I was really enjoying AEW and why, I got accused of the other way, of, oh, now you're an AEW mark, how dare you. I'm a wrestling fan. I like good wrestling. 5 years ago, AEW's show from start to finish felt cohesive. It felt like a cohesive show that would start at one point and build up as the night went along and end on something really cool. And now, it all just feels random. I think the biggest example I'd use for that is the title run of Swerve Strickland, which to me was a complete disaster. Even though Swerve Strickland is over as a wrestler, I think he's a very good wrestler. I think he cuts great promos. I think they should have left the title on him for a while and really built him up as a heel. And when the fans are cheering for him, ignore it. WWE's ignored fans for ages when they've needed to. And I think with Swerve, they needed to. I understand fans were turning against Hangman. All right, you can turn Hangman heel. Turning Swerve face didn't make sense. And then now he doesn't have the belt. And it just feels like his run wasn't worth very much. Now, he's in a feud with Bobby Lashley, and Lashley and Shelton Benjamin joining the company should help. The problem is when you get an A property like the Hurt Business, or whatever they're going to go by, I guess Hurt Syndicate or whatever, right? When you get that A property, if you don't have the right writers, it's not a whole lot different than when Bret Hart went to WCW. Bret Hart went to WCW. I was so excited, like, oh man, I can't wait to see all these matches he can have, and this is going to be great. And then it sucked. It sucked. It was bad. It was written badly. It didn't make any sense. Before you know it, he's a heel, and it's like, why'd they even bring him in? And I hope that doesn't happen with Lashley, but we've seen other talents go to AEW and just nothing. The one that stands out to me is Rusev. Rusev leaving WWE and going to AEW. This is a guy he's big, he's strong, he can move, he cuts a good promo, he's got a unique character, he's got a unique look. And I don't think they knew what to do with him. They gave him the whole video game thing, and then, you know, he's the Redeemer, and then it just and I know injuries get in there and all that fun stuff, but it just feels like they didn't really know what to do with him. And they should have put the title on him, is what they should have done. He has been the most underrated wrestler for a long time. And I wasn't a fan of Rusev initially when he first got brought up to the main roster in WWE, but he won me over. He won me over in the feud with John Cena, where I was like, you know what? This guy's a legit main eventer. I hope they give him a run. And he kind of got one and then kind of didn't. Never a world champion. And that to me just seems wrong. He's been an excellent wrestler for a long time. And yeah, AEW just, like right now, Christian is one of the hottest properties. If they gave him an extended run with the world title. The problem with that, of course, is that Christian's older for a wrestler, and I don't know how many new fans you're going to win over, how many fresh fans you're going to win over, because while AEW fans will argue that, hey, the audience is fine, everything's fine, nothing to see here, we have it's the greatest company in the world. If you're not making new fans, you got a problem. If you're not seeing the ratings going in the other direction and people are starting to tune in and get one over, you have a problem, because we know WWE is creating new fans all the time, and they're starting to get a lot of people back. I think part of what happened too is the WWE under Vince McMahon was kind of a disaster towards the end of his run at the top of the company, and so AEW may have looked better in comparison because we knew Vince's booking was outdated and some of the thoughts he had were just nonsensical. And so it made AEW look better. Then Hunter / Triple H / Paul Levesque takes over and he makes it a very good wrestling program again. All of the wrestling programs have improved under Hunter, and Shawn Michaels deserves some credit as well for NXT. And AEW has not improved. It has generally not gotten better. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't know how you fix it. I don't think giving MJF the title back would fix it. I don't think giving Adam Cole the title would fix it. Because I don't think the titles, I don't think the wrestlers are necessarily the problem. It's the writing. And I think the writing is just bad. And it feels rushed. We could tell with Vince in charge that the shows were being written on the spot. And they didn't really know what they were doing. Because it came across on TV. It was just, what is this? Why is this happening? This doesn't make any sense. Wait, why did that guy just lose in 5 seconds? Oh, the last segment went over, so they made that a 5-second match. Well, that's stupid. And we don't see that as much now with WWE, but yeah, AEW, it just feels like the direction needs to be different. And we've talked about this before. As long as the guy at the top, who's Tony Khan, feels like, no, our show's great, and we're doing great, and everything's awesome. As long as he feels that way, nothing changes. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on the state of things in the wrestling world with WWE and, of course, I want to say NXT, but that's still WWE and AEW. And I'm going to say this too. TNA has a very good product. TNA doesn't get a lot of attention, but they do. I watched a little sort of documentary on Rosemary. And I loved the Rosemary character before, but man, after watching that documentary, I was like, man, I hope she wins all the belts. I hope she goes to NXT and wins that title, and then she goes to the main roster and wins both those women's titles. She lives for wrestling. She doesn't have the look that Vince McMahon would have wanted for a woman's wrestler because they all had to be like supermodels and everything. But man, Rosemary lives that character, and she's great. So here's to hoping that maybe with the TNA and NXT crossovers that we're seeing, hopefully some more eyeballs get on the TNA product because it's good. It's good, and there have been times where TNA hasn't been good either. So if you're looking for an alternative, I would suggest TNA. I will say that I would suggest TNA. So if you don't like WWE and if you're not sold on AEW, it doesn't hurt. Try out TNA. It's actually a pretty good show right now. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.